Hi everybody, I am Ryan McHale. I am the curator of exhibits here at the Ketchikan Museums, and welcome to Museum Midday. We will be joined with Chuck Slagle shortly, and he's going to give us some background to his experience in aviation. We wish you were here in person, but thank you for joining us virtually. When we are here together, we're making sure that we're maintaining 6 feet distance and wearing masks as well. Our open hours are Tuesday through Saturday, 1 to 5.
So much about Roy Jones. I left that to Bucky Dawson. But I think about him every time I climb the mountains back here. Because all the mountains behind Ketchikan are named after either Northburg or Roy Jones. Or I just think it's cool. And I think it's cool that aviation, float-plane aviation in Alaska, started right here in Ketchikan. So I think that's something we should be proud about. I love these old shots of Ketchikan, and
Number 2 right here is actually a shot right here. Actually a shot of Bob Ellis. He actually joined that flight. It was the first nonstop flight from Seattle to Alaska.
oh, how fun.
1929, yeah.
I like, one of the real cool stories is just the evolution of the radial engines. There were Wrights and Lycomings and Pratt Whitneys, and all of those end up showing up on the float planes they came through. And by the 70s, all of them were Pratt Whitneys, the 985s pretty much. I think it's cool that the area right downtown, before they dredged it, was a home to a lot of the float plane activity. It must have been pretty interesting to see that plane show up right downtown.
Yeah, you got a mixture of mud flats, baseball fields, and, and planes landing in boats.
Gotta love how they dressed up. Flying was pretty special back at that time.
You're talking about the evolution of the float plane. Roy Jones, actually his seat was a wicker seat, and he was basically in like a wash tub. So
really,
just start from that until where you get in 1929, just 9 years later.
if you look at the Ford Trimotors that were in the 20s and early 30s, all the passenger seats were wicker.
Oh, really?
Which was pretty cool. Yeah, it was I think something from that era.
And then we're moving on from some of these early flights into the establishment of commercial aviation here.
Well, see the old hangar here?
Yeah.
Have you talked at all about the story of Hamlin taking that old hangar and putting it out of town?
We've heard of it. Yeah, it's still out north, isn't it?
Yeah, Dick Hamlin played a big part in aviation around here. Was pretty creative, pretty smart. There was a crane passing through town, and he built himself a huge log float and actually lifted that hangar off and put it on the new float and towed it north of town. So that in itself was, and for years, general aviation used it. This brings back lots of memories. I suspect everybody that takes a look at your exhibit that's been around town for a while remembers this, remembers the painting. And amphibian room was breakfast for our family, a lot of Sundays. And American World Airways, that's gorgeous.
Yeah, Golden Age of flight.
I remember, barely remember, but it came up in '57. I remember flying south on a P&N airplane for a medical problem I'd had, and I remember just barely getting on the airplane. When I was in Juneau, when the first 707 showed up, our dad took us out there, and I remember that explicitly. But cold winter day, blowing snow all around, 707 was an airplane that was very loud.
Do you have any memories of landing on a net and then making that 12-mile trip from a net to Ketchikan?
First time obviously I went to a net when no, I was in Juneau at the time. The flight I remember is, oh shoot, I forget his name, but I left Ketchikan in the fall of, right in '73, the winter of '73, to go get my pilot license. So I remember flying the Goose over to a net at that time. A lot of when I got into aviation, it was 71, 72, 73, there was a lot of furloughed Alaska Airlines pilots. So they were working for Coast Air and Simpson Air and Weber Air. And so a lot of these guys were Goose drivers that were in the process of waiting for Alaska Airlines to grow and pick them up again. What a gorgeous airplane. It's tough not to say the Goose is the favorite airplane. It was a pilot's airplane. Where is this at, Ryan?
That, I believe, is, what, the west end of town?
Oh, you know where that is? That is Coast Air. So that's one of Coast Air's beavers. This elevator here has been covered over, but that building used to be a cannery type building. And then when they started pouring money into the consolidated airline between Coastal and Ellis, they built an elevator for PBYs.
Oh, okay.
So that elevator went down, brought them up, and then Simpson Air left where it's at, where the Westside building is now.
Yeah.
And went down and became Coast Air somewhere in '71, '72, and they actually used that elevator.
That's really cool. And then this is getting into the story of float camps, getting loggers out to where they need to be.
Oh, there's Freddie.
Yeah.
That's a good shot of Freddie. Yeah, I remember flying Mildred Mandy around for years, '74 to '78. What a wonderful woman. Also very opinionated. She would, have you heard that before?
Well, I've heard that she's a pretty cool person. She was a nurse in World War II, and after the war, she decided to just work on a pineapple plantation down in Hawaii.
No, I'd get on the airplane and she'd say, "This airplane's overloaded, and you need to unload something before we go." And she would reroute the route and says, "Yeah, we're going here, but you're not dragging me on these bumps. We're going to go there first." I just remember she had such confidence that she was just held in very high esteem in all the logging camps. I remember Coast Air, which was run by Bill Clapp in '71, '72. He had visions of grandeur, bought a couple Gooses, and I remember when he tried to get all of the push pilots or all of the flight crew that had worked for Simpson and come on to Coast Air get into the uniforms. What a mess that was. I mean, they were like $1,000 or something, and half the crew hated them, and half of them thought it was the future. And I remember Chuck Collins he was pretty proud of his uniform, and Cliff Cam wouldn't have anything to do with it. So the uniform was a tough thing for Bill Clapp to get everybody to do.
Yeah, it's like the strappings of a real airline, but then you get a lot of pushback too from pilots that don't.
I mean, tough to put lipstick on a pig. You were a float plane operation flying 185s and beavers, multiple stops at logging camps and stuff, and to do that in uniform, you're afraid of getting grease on, which didn't seem appropriate at the time. I had a pie tin that almost killed me from float plane gun. Let me tell you that story.
Yeah, that sounds good.
And there's the otters that came in. Remember when the otters first came to town? Keith Newstrom kind of latched onto it, and he would fill that airplane up. It would take off and disappear around the end of Pinnock, because it couldn't even climb over Pinnock. It had so much in it. And it took a while to figure out just what the airplane would carry and what was safe. And it took a while to figure out as well that the 1340 engines on the Otters were not nearly as reliable as the 985, and that they needed to be really taken care of to last and not fail. And as a result, at the end of the otter era here, when TIPSCO had 7 or 8 of them, they were assigning individual pilots to an airplane that took care of that engine. If they weren't flying, it was parked. And so the care and cultivation of a new engine was something that became really important on the otters, because they just couldn't be abused like the 985. Argus had retractable wing floats.
Yeah.
There were just a couple of them with Ellis and Alaska Coastal. This was kind of the norm. It was nice to have them to catch the airplanes and such, but to keep that float above the docks, you had to run quite a bit more fuel. I think it's like 20 or 30 gallons on the right side of the airplane, so that it always fell off, and this was high enough to get over the log floats. And you also had to be, the tendency would be for somebody on the dock to stop that, which would pivot the nose into the dock. So you either need to have somebody like Freddie that knew what he was doing, pulled it ahead, or the airplane, or you had to go out the window. So right above the window was a latch. So literally, I'm not sure how big the window was, but it maybe 24 by 16, 18, but you literally had to turn, pull yourself out the window and jump on the dock. So you could fly a goose if you were out of shape or overweight, if somebody else was doing the docking. But if you were actually using it at the logging camps, you had to be able to get it out the window to fly the goose. So I'm not sure I could do that anymore. I started flying with Jack Cousins, like half the town, and
You started as a dock boy, right? The ramp rat?
I started, what happened was I was working, I was scraping a boat for Wendell Jones, and I showed enough initiative that he recommended me as a dock hand on a Coast Air. So spring of, I don't know, 72, 71, 72, went to work for Coast Air, and then kind of got the bug, and I signed up for lessons with Jack Cousins, and he took me through my solo, and then I went south in my senior year in high school and got my license in Seattle. He was a hell of an instructor.
After you got your license, where did you work?
After I got my license, I worked at Coast Air, my commercial, and then I went from Coast Air to Weber in '74. I didn't know all of these folks. I obviously worked with Terry Wells. I knew Pete, Pete's son Mike. I married my sister, so I was close to that family. Worked with Mary Beth over the years. This is the gentleman Manzoni, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's Carl. Ken Leonard and I have been friends for years. Worked together. Dave Metcalf and I worked together for years. My first day working for Coast Air, I didn't put the oil cap on in the Beaver, and it's right down there in the passenger seat. And the problem is, about the time a 985 is warmed up, it's about body temperature. So it can spew all this oil out on the customer's legs without knowing it until a gallon is spewed out. So that's exactly what happened. Dave had gone and met the captain, and I think the airplane was 16 Zulu, got blown over by the wind, which has happened to more than one person in Metlakatla, and they rebuilt the whole airplane. So it was brand new. One of his first flights, brand new dockhead, I put the oil cap on sideways, and it spewed a gallon of oil onto the pasture. And this, I was brand new. This man, I thought he was going to kill me. He was very upset with me, but that was a lesson well learned.
Yeah, I didn't make that mistake twice.
I did. I don't know if I did it again, but I was pretty conscious about it.
You had mentioned Dick Hamlin with the Ellis hangar there. Dick also had a class at the high school at K-High. And then this image right here, almost all of them either became pilots, the students once they graduated, or involved within aviation. And then these are some of the training books and tools that he had for his class.
Yeah, and we actually had Dick Hamlin on a virtual tour of the exhibit, so he got to see some of that just
fun.
recently.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dick was my algebra instructor. I wasn't his best student. And I think anybody you talk to with Hamlin will remember the stories of aviation were woven into the math class. So, what a gorgeous presentation. If I'm not mistaken, this is when Dick Hamlin decided to do that aviation. This airplane here, 597, he was flying, I'm almost certain it was 597. He was flying to the pass going to Craig and pushing the weather and crashed and spent the night in the woods, and they found him and they pulled that airplane out and rebuilt it. But I may be mistaken on the tail number, but I'm relatively certain. I talked to him about it a couple of times, and what he remembered is his dad had told him, if you crash, don't just wander off in the woods, you get hypothermia. It was a bad time of the year. He spent the night walking around a tree, so he didn't get lost, he stayed warm. But that's a story that he's more than willing to tell.
What are those like considerations you have to take while flying here? Because like, flying in Southeast Alaska is not like flying anywhere else. What are some of those lessons that like a young pilot has to learn?
Well, there's a couple ways to crash airplanes or have a problem. One is that you're overconfident and you think you're invincible, and eventually that'll get you. And the other one is that you're overly safe. Somebody says that, yeah, I'm just not going to push the weather, which isn't possible the way they fly here. You're going to go out on a good day and come back on a bad day. So somebody says what makes a good pilot? Somebody that, in my opinion, that can handle just about anything and then chooses not to. In other words, they can go out, they can fly a couple hundred feet if they had to, they can land on a gusty day, but it just chooses not to push the weather, and as a result, stacks the odds in their favor. They're going to have tough wind conditions and tough weather conditions. It comes with the territory, the fact that it's VFR and marginal conditions. But if they make good choices all the time, then they can be around. So people that did it for a long time were very capable, but they were also very disciplined about not taking risks they don't have to take. So that's my theory on it after I've done it for a bit. Yeah, there's Simpson Air. I'll be darned. 185 was, Pete Sessman told me that people in town told him to go broke with the Beaver. It was too big for the marketplace. When Pete started Weber, it was Luskins and Aronkas, small airplanes that could barely get off the water with a man and his luggage. So 185s were a big thing, especially with the pods. 300 pounds would fit in the pods, so it was the workhorse. And when the Beaver came along, then they thought it was too big, and obviously it wasn't. It was a town full of otter before it was all over with. Times were a little different back then. You can see this got two-bladed propellers. The decibels that come out of a two-bladed propeller are so much different than a three-bladed propeller. And invariably, Dale Clark, or I forget the gentleman that was owning the place when he started flying, but Cotton Liddell, they'd be out of here first thing in the morning with some loggers that were trying to keep their job and show up on time. So 4:30 or 5:30 in the morning, if a 185 with a two-bladed propeller took off in town, the whole town was awake. It was that loud. So this goose here, 72 Papa Romeo, a hell of a story. It came out of the factory and went to the British Lend-Lease program. So it flew out of Trinidad looking for subs back in the war. And then Bucky gave me a picture of it flying at in San Francisco, some commuter type thing. Then Alaska Coastal bought it, and operated it for years. My dad actually worked on it. When I went back to buy that airplane in '81, took my dad and he opened the logbooks and you could see where he signed off an annual on it and stuff, which was kind of cool. But Coastal operated it for a while, and then they decided to put turbines on it. So the first airplane with PT6s on it, 70 hours or something, lands in the harbor in Gastineau and flips over, so it's wrecked. So they ship it south to foreign and domestic. I think a guy named Lloyd Rico. And they rebuilt it. They rebuilt Gooses for years. And then it was bought by Kodiak Western and went north to work out of Kodiak. And it blew a jug and ground moved on a runway. So it needed to be fixed up again. So it went down south again to a guy named Probert, who actually rebuilt them for Catalina Airways that went between Long Beach and Catalina. So he rebuilt it and sold it to some guy in New York who was going to fly to Fire Island. And they didn't make any money on it, so I bought it there. I flew it back up, made some changes at Kenmore, and operated it from 1981 to 1986, I believe. And then there was a kind of a recession going on. Interest rates were like 15, 18%. Nobody was buying anything. So I needed to sell it, and I sold it to a guy named John Wild in Papua New Guinea. And, but it came with it being delivered and training his son. And there's no way that that airplane would make it. Didn't have the legs to make it to Hawaii. So I found a Swedish freighter that was full of spruce from Vancouver. It was going to Fiji, and then on to Brisbane. And I convinced the guy to put the airplane on top of the lumber. So I met him in LA, landed next to the ship. He put it on top of the lumber. Then he went to Fiji. I met him in Brisbane, picked it up, trained the guy up through the coast of Australia, across the Coral Sea, and left it in Papua New Guinea. It was there for a while. Then I went to Fiji for a while. As far as I know, it's still alive, doing well in Australia. So that's the story of 72 Papa Romeo.
Well, and we should mention, we have AJ identified in that photo, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we already got to talk with AJ, and he kind of a past Museum Midday.
It's just so typical. AJ's up on top doing the work, and I'm off bullshit. It is. It's just representative of our whole work relationship over our life. When I started Westlight, I was it was a general partnership with Alex Pananides and his group of investors of Waterfall. And so the name Westlight, I think a lot of his businesses were West something or other out of Santa Barbara. So there was kind of a recognition that they were the money-minded thing or something. And we looked through the phone book and decided that was a good name, and that's where it came from. Oh, for a great group of pictures. Weber Airlines, who had that?
Yeah, that was over at Carlin Air.
Wow. That was Mike. Ah. And Mike and I started flying together. So, just so it's on tape. I was thinking of Super Cup South one time, and I landed at Boeing Field. And I took Mike for a ride, and I said, Mike, you want to land? And he goes, I've never landed a tail dragger. And I said, it's no big deal. Problem is with tail draggers, you come in, if you land too flat, the tail will come down and the wings will get more lift and you'll bounce all the way down the runway, which is exactly what he did. He never completely forgave me for setting him up like that in front of the world and everybody.
You have his logbooks
These are his?
here, yeah, and it's really great because you can see the considerations a young pilot is taking, whether he's being sucked into a Sanger swell or patchy fog, bouncing in town.
Can we look in there and see if he admits to bouncing down the runway at Yeah, there were people that kept good logbooks and those that didn't. I kept a good one while I was getting going because you were looking for the time. But A lot of the people have been around for a while. Herman, I know, they would just log it monthly, 140 hours, this or that, but Jimmy V, guy that worked at Tai for years, his logbooks were pieces of art. He had just all the details, and so I'm not sure who all does that, but there were those that treated it as a journal,
Yeah.
and those that treated it as a necessary evil. I was the latter.
Yeah, Mike has this, really as a journal of his life. He mentions going on his first dates with Marna, going out to take her dad out to lunch, and then also the first time he heard his kid's heartbeat.
Oh,
So
yeah.
he really has his whole life in there.
Oh, wonderful. 985. Who's, oh, that was Skip Duncan's, huh?
Yeah,
Look how big the radios were back then. Good grief.
and that signaling mirror is actually Roy Jones.
Which one?
Have you ever used one of these, like registers, talking about, or directory, route stop directory, showing you all the different like ways that you can land, if it's okay weather, if it's a little windy,
Sure, everybody had, there was all sorts of versions of that.
yeah, different
State,
understanding.
federal, things that were created locally
Yeah.
within the company.
Yeah,
There's Weber and Simpson back in the late 60s, early 70s. Wow. That's, when I started in aviation, that's what the facilities looked like. I started at Simpson Air with that hangar. It was actually owned by Coast Air, Bill Clapp at the time, but they hadn't made the move down the street.
and is that where the elevator was that you pointed out earlier?
No, that obviously is an elevator there that, finally when they got rid of that, I was building a building, the West Flight building, and I dumped that onto a float, and took it up, made an anchor out of it. Just dropped it right off of the point. I remember when the Ellis Airlines shut down, or Alaska Coastal, and they sold 7 or 8 of the Gooses to Antilles Airboats, to Charlie Blair, and Ellis had the most gorgeous parts room, wooden bins, craftsman built, hand-painted part numbers. It was very well organized, very impressive.
Yeah, you got the parts room up there, testing room. Yeah, some of the old photos actually look like it would be some scientific lab, and they had a mechanic in white coat.
Have you seen Bucky's Goose?
Yes, yeah, we've been out there before.
Here's an example of attention to detail. So that's Mike Mood.
Yep.
Just the other day I was going through some old boxes and I found a company shirt, Westlife with Mike on it. Gave it to him, 30-something years old. Here's Jeff Coriel. Yeah, a lot of fun.
Extra toughs there. These were Riley Murdoch's when he was working at Pac Air. And the soles are coming off. They're all beat up in the back. And his brother Luke is actually now at Misty Fjords. And I was trying to get a pair of his shoes, and his shoes have holes in them, and they're all ripped up. And he's like, no, I still got time on these. But it's kind of funny to just see how, yeah, being a dockhand is hard work.
Well, you see that extra toughs for extra tough, so get some grip when it's wet. And it's kind of kind of the shoe of choice, the boot of choice.
Did you ever fall in when hopping between floats?
Of course. Yeah. Normally when I fell in, it wasn't hopping between floats. It was, I had untied the airplane and went to do something different and turned around the step and the airplane left. In other words, it was some untied airplane that were.
Swimming out to?
Yeah, what's that?
You're swimming out to the airplane now?
Well, no, I mean, not by much.
Oh,
Just
okay.
that I was doing something and I was ready to go and then
Oh, okay.
they, well, can you take this last piece of freight? So I went over to get it. Yeah, I remember a few choices that, a few of those, everybody went in the water. There was just no way around it. I mean, wintertime, if it was 20 degrees or less, if you made a multi-stop trip at the north end, you were walking on a couple inches of ice, and obviously that's dangerous. So, oh, cool.
And over here, we're really getting into the safety aspect of flight here and emergency response, and really the need for helicopters in tight places where float planes can't necessarily get.
Well, yeah, Kenny, he broke lots of barriers. I mean, turbine engines, larger engines, just how to work the stuff. It was late 50s, 60s was a very creative time for the helicopter industry. Doesn't seem to be a lot of social distancing in some of these pictures.
It's a different time, yeah.
That's a great picture on the ice.
Yeah. Yeah, that news clipping is really awesome. That I think it was Herman that went back to town to get some hot dogs so they could grill on the ice.
Well, problem is you just don't stop. And you land and you go.
Like ice skates.
No, you just don't stop. You are sitting there in an airplane that's roaring along waiting for there to be a fault in the ice or something. You touch down and yeah, you just don't think you're ever going to stop. It goes on and on and on. So yeah, it's kind of, you have to have a really big lake and it's kind of frightening if there's no texture to the ice at all.
Yeah, I really love, we've got some videos of, people just fishing off the floats, and we had Gary Freitag talk about science kind of helped along by aviation, and he was talking about throwing crab pots off the side.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, we have a photo here of, is it Carl Manzoni, and then Pete as well, helping out with the forest or Fish and Wildlife, releasing some steelhead. But yeah, I've heard too, even flying and making routes, and then also picking up crab pots. And
Herman was good at that. He knew where the crab pots were and picked trips that had time to do it. And a lot of the crab feeds we had down at Weber were instigated by Herman.
Bud boating there on his retirement,
I remember that.
and then his missing man formation after he passed away.
And I bought the boat for my time. I remember my dad worked on it quite a bit, on the engines on it. Who is that?
That is Bob Adams.
Oh, it is Bob Adams. I'll be darned.
And he came in with some great photos too of the back of Madison when you could fly a float plane right up to it.
Yeah,
All docks right there.
53 Fox. He bought it from Weber. Parked it there for years.
Yeah, he was explaining that Madison really got its start from getting resources out to logging camps.
I think Bob started flying for Weber, and a bit of an instructor, but there's some guys that had just wasn't their thing. Rick Hardcastle was one of them, Bob Adams, they went on to other careers.
So, how did you get interested, we had talked about it a little bit earlier, but how did you get interested in actually becoming a pilot? And what was that journey from working as a dock hand all the way up to commercial pilot's license?
Well, I had a bit of aviation in my background. My father was a pilot, a commercial pilot. He had full-time private pilot, and but he worked for Coastal Ellis, and well, it was Coastal at the time. And he was a hatchet mechanic, passionate about aircraft maintenance, and went on to be passionate about diesel mechanics. But so there's a little bit of aviation in the family. And then I just stumbled into a job loading freight at Simpson Airs. It was transitioning to Coast Air. Looked like a career path. Got my private when I was 16, and as soon as I turned 18, I took a break from high school and got my commercial. And I went to work for Weber Air. Coast Air was